Hello and welcome back, everyone. We're here again on YouTube and LinkedIn with another episode of the Top Innovator Series. This is where we dive into proven leadership ideas and, of course, we hear from the brilliant minds behind them. My name is Josef Martens and I'm thrilled to introduce our guest today. With us today is Alex Grohmann. Alex has been a long-time CISO and we're thrilled to have him with us today in our conversation. Alex, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Greetings, everybody, and greetings to you, Joseph.
Alex, you have a super successful leadership journey in technology. When you reflect about your own journey, when you think about your own journey, what do you think are some of the reasons for that success?
I think a lot of it has to do with the industry. Luckily, my industry in cyber was a growth industry. We had a lot of different challenges with leadership because it wasn't the traditional role. Not everybody was like the old, General Motors or GE, where people are like, okay, you have a specific track. There's a lot of times where you have opportunities to make significant growth because the company had grown so much, and that's a kind of indicative of a lot of the technology companies. So there's a lot of times where if you're playing like the old game of chutes and ladders, you can go from a 4 to an 8. But then again, also sometimes at some of these technology companies, I always think of AOL because they're a major one. You can also go from a 9 to a 2 here on some certain place. But in terms of the growth, I think it's been lucky because of the industry. Now, will we see that same growth in the next couple of years with technology? I'm not sure if we're going to be able to because, technology, again, Chief Information Security Officer, the very first one, Steve Katz, he's passed right now, but he wasn't even all that old. So, the industry is just so embryonic. I've got friends of mine who have, run insurance companies. The insurance companies are probably the same from the day one to the day end. I've got other friends of mine that, have, had to do with automotive, and automotive really hasn't changed that much other than maybe the EVs. So it's a unique perspective because of the changing market that we have, and it's going to change even more in certain ways with the artificial intelligence and some of the other growths. But I would have to sum that up as just because a lot of it has to do with the ever-changing nature of the cyber and the IT communities.
Got it. So, Alex, I hear the gracious answer. I get it. And at the same time, not everyone in tech is on that same journey. So I'm wondering, when you look at yourself, what you bring to the game, what would you point to? What do you think are some of the contributors there that helped you in this, no doubt, great marketplace?
Everybody likes to say, wow, I was on a rocket path and I did the greatest thing ever. I was just like Bill Gates and I had no problems the whole way through. But there's also a lot of people where you talk to them like, wow, I had this problem or I had this challenge or, a lot of great success stories, they're talking about. I think, like, oh, I got fired from this job and it helped me learn from this, or, this company collapsed under me. For me, I think it was just tenaciousness, never to have a negative attitude. It was always, hey, look, there's something else coming up. Learn from it. Every you never want to call a failure, but every time you have a setback or when you want a euphemism, you look at it like, okay, this hurts. Let me wallow in it for a little while, but it's going to be, I'm going to allow it for this much, but eventually I'm going to have to pick myself up because I got no other choice, I did not come from, extravagant means, a family wealth or anything like that. Family did relatively, very strong middle class, but it wasn't anything like, wow, you know what? I'm just going to go on my sailboat and, do whatever for the next couple of months. It wasn't like that. It's more like, hey, a setback, got to hustle. So I think that helped with even one of some of the challenges of companies that, may not have made it, .com bust, the financial services bust, those have definitely impacted me in my career, but always realizing that, hey, look, there's so much opportunity out there. You just got to realize that even if it's not directly in front of you, if you can't see it, it's out there somewhere, and you got to believe it. There's things, such as the secret, there's power positive thinking. If you take some of those tenets and realize that, hey, look, let's apply these in my life, you realize that good things will happen. Now, you have to start believing those things when things are good, because when things are not so good, that's not the minute you want to start picking up one of these books or start applying one of these basic tenets. You got to have to believe that, and you got to realize, hey, look, there are opportunities. Never give up. Have that positive attitude, and go for it.
Yeah, got it. When you think of some of the mentors you had, I'm sure you had mentors, trusted advisors who were by your side and who
Sure.
followed your journey. What was some advice you got from them that was helpful to you? Maybe something that still sticks with you.
Yeah, it's funny because mentors, I think, is a key, and I'm sure we'll come back to a lot of this too.
Hmm.
Some of the mentors I had weren't really, you wouldn't really describe them as like a full mentor. They were more like people that were, a little bit further ahead in the career journey. Maybe you can call them bosses or thing like that, but they weren't always like a true mentor where they thought they were giving me good advice. I would have I would have really benefited if I really had somebody who I could say, okay, you are my mentor, and I really believe that you're my mentor, and we have this specific relationship. Versus along the way, it has been people that are like either managers or bosses that really inspired me, and really did give me good advice. But there's also the ones that have had bosses and managers that got promoted because they were technically savvy in this field. A lot
Yeah.
of times if you get bosses that are like, wow, the people skills are definitely not there, but they got promoted because they're an architect and, with, hey, no other job description. Um, but some of the good advices that I've had is, always looking at things from a 360-degree view. I remember one manager was always like, you know what, you've got to look at the whole playing field when you look at things. A lot of times in the early part of the career, you've got this little like, okay, this is my job and
Mm,
this is what I do and
yeah.
that's it. And maybe the guy to my right or to the left are doing these other things, but
Yeah.
you've got to start experiencing like, what is the whole team doing? What is the bigger point of things? I compare this to a football team. When you go on a football team, you look at the NFL and the NFL playoffs, now the college football playoffs. If you look at a left tackle, he's got the person in front of you and person there. That's his immediate. But he has to understand what is going on with the quarterback, where that quarterback's going, where the defense is going to go. You got to have a situational awareness of what is going on and what's the big objective going forward. Because even though that left tackle is just say, look, I've got this one man in front of me, or
Yeah.
hey, I got to go over there and I got to tackle this other person or hit this other person. You got to understand what's the big game, and this ties back to a lot of times when I'm mentoring people who have worked for me in the past. One of the first things when I come in somewhere new or I have someone new, it's like, okay, what does our organization do? What are we in business for? And there's a lot of times we're like, I have no idea. And I'm like, no, we're going to go through. You're going to
That's
learn exactly what this does. Learn what our industry does. What is their objectives about there? It's too easy to say, well, hey, I'm a Unix admin and I just need to know how to use the Unix admin. Okay. Or, hey, I'm just a network admin. No, you're part of this company. You need to understand the full scope of what we're doing, what's our objective, uh, because eventually, if you want to be able to move up the ladder, you need to be able to understand the context of business. As a CISO, I've become less and less technical and more
right.
risk knowledgeable. I don't think, I mean, to show my age, like I always use a joke, like, please don't ask me how to subnet anymore because I couldn't do it. Now, it's showing my name, but the fact is that you have to know the technology, you have to keep current with the technology, but it morphs. You really have to understand more
Yeah.
risk because you're now being an advisor to a board, you're educating your board, you're educating your peers on the C-suite. If you're not able to articulate that and understand how things work in a business context, you're not going to be able to protect your budget. You're not going to be able to detect additional initiatives that you need to get done from a security perspective. You're not going to be able to justify additional headcount if they're needed. Um, it's being a CISO is like a good Secret Service agent, or team. If you do a great job,
Yeah.
you hear nothing. If you do a bad job, then
That's.
you're out of a job, right?
Mhm.
And that's what a CISO does. And a lot of times when I always think of as my right hand person has always been the chief financial officer because he's the one who has the purse strings, right? He's the one you really got to impress. Either you report to a CEO or a CTO or a CIO, whoever you report to as a CISO. There's various ways, but you need to be able to keep each one of those really
Yeah.
engaged. You got to keep them very educated about what's going on, what's going to happen. So you really need to understand the business and the technology, not just the tech, and not just the nuts and bolts of the technology. It's
Totally.
like, hey, look, we're
Yeah.
gonna apply. If you start going on about how we're gonna, implement Kubernetes containers to a chief financial officer, he's gonna be like, thanks, I got something else to do. What are you gonna do? If you're able to
Yeah.
say, hey, we're taking over this new technology that's going to end up helping us save us in 3 to 5 years, and here's why, we're going to be able to head off a potential financial bill that's coming up that could be significant in a while. You need to be able to keep that. You need to be able to keep current and technical. Don't get me wrong, but you also need to be able
Yeah.
to start learning what is around you.
Yeah.
What is the big picture? What are you guys in business for? How are you going to grow? If you're able to grow as a business, that's going to help downstream. It's going to have more, better funded for your technology and your security solutions. But you got to see the big picture.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you're coming to the point with the focus on the business. I'm sure we'll get to that again. Let me ask you one more question about your mentors, though. Is there something that you heard from your mentors, something that either they shared with you, you picked it up from them, you saw it, and at the time you thought this does not make sense? At the time it looked to you like I don't see it. You might even go as far as saying this is moronic. This is stupid what they're doing here. And then with some years of additional wisdom, you come to realize, maybe there was something to it.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things. One, there's the two mentors, the mentors that are your bosses, and you think that because they're boss, they're your mentor, and you take a knowledge of them, and then you realize, you know what, they're a boss, not a mentor, and that is a very good distinction that everybody should know. The
Okay.
difference between someone who's a leader, and someone who's in a job description above you, and that says, okay, that's your boss, and tells you something to do. Now, in terms of the good mentors and the people that are like, wow, okay, here's what you need to do. And it only comes later. And that comes with that gap knowledge. If you think of Abraham Maslow's, help actualization, wisdom is the top. As you get older and a little bit more gray hair, if you know what I mean, you get to that point where you don't quite have wisdom, but you're getting closer to that pyramid. Earlier in the career, you don't really understand wisdom is. You think you know everything, but you don't. But you don't actually able to apply everything because you just haven't had the experience yet. Now, a mentor might assume that you have some of the experience or assume that you're going to get there, but they may be telling you like, "Hey, look, here's the secret of this," but you may not, you may not be necessarily ready, or may not
Mm,
be ready to be able to understand that. But later on, you'd be like, "Oh, okay, this is where that comes into play. This is why this is important." And eventually, if you know that and you're looking for it, that's probably going to appear in your life a little bit more, and you're like, "Oh, this is what he talked about, or this is what she mentioned. Here it is." There's that crossroads in my career that says, okay, here's the they were mentioning. Okay, at least I have a little bit better idea about how to handle this because I was warned or advised that this was coming up.
yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, we talked about your past. I'd like to take a look at where you are today. And
Sure,
again, not a question about companies, roles, or projects or
sure.
products, about your leadership journey still. When you look at where you are today, Alex, what do you think is an area where you feel there is more? There's more I can do. There is an area where I want to develop, where I want to grow, where I'm not fully there yet.
In terms of a personal journey, you never, the imposter syndrome that almost all technology leaders have. We're feeling like, oh, I don't know this. I think it's being comfortable with being uncomfortable about that situation, realizing, there is stuff to learn. There is constantly having to keep a nose in a book, constantly learning about what the next technology is. Um, so I think it would be, the never ending search or seeking of knowledge. I think it's something that's really indicative of our industry and leaders that we have to do.
Hmm.
Um, AI right now, it's about to turn its head on its, industry on its head right now. So not only do I have to understand the implications of that, I've got to be able to understand it in such a way that I'm able to articulate to other
Yeah.
people, not just people within my company, people in my industry. When I go speak at different conferences or different events, I need to be able to answer any question that could possibly come up. So if I'm going there and I'm talking about item X, it could divulge to a lot of different things. So I've got to be able to field any one of those questions. I've got to be able to articulate that. If I'm at a cocktail party or a business function where people are not in technology and they ask me something about this, I've got to be quick and I've got to be able to do that, because not only am I representing myself as a leader, I'm representing myself as a company and what I'm doing. I need to make sure that they have faith in my knowledge and my ability to do this. So the continuous obtainment of knowledge, keeping ourselves educated, it's a challenge. And again, it comes back to our industry. There's a lot of industries where, the job is the exact same day one it is from, day 40 when you retire. That's, it's definitely not even anything close in the technology realm.
Right.
It's constantly changing. If I think back when I first started X number of years ago, we'll leave it at that. I still remember putting jumpers on cards, IRQs and things like that, which most people don't even understand. It's
Wow.
the change
That's
from
very
then to
different.
now.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Totally different. My word. Yeah.
It is. It's funny. Before I was just on here, I guess someone had a little picture, I guess, on social media, and it was a picture of a car with the four pedals. The brake pedal, the clutch, the brake, the gas. And they're like, yeah, are you old enough to remember what this looks like? And it's like, well, yeah, of course. That's the clutch and and then you realize that 95% of the cars in the United States don't even have a clutch anymore.
No. Mm-hmm.
And it's not even that far. And there's like people that don't even understand how to drive a stick. And it's kind of like that when you compare that analogy to technology. Yeah, I remember back when the clutch was. I remember when you had to put jumpers on cars. I remember when you had to figure out how to, what port you were going to configure for this on a laptop or a desktop even before then. But you constantly got to keep on reinventing yourself, making sure that you understand the new technology, what's coming up, and constantly striving. There's, until the day says, okay, I'm calling it a day, I'm retiring, you got to keep pushing yourself. It's difficult. My nightstand, I'd like to say that I've got, the leisure books, but a lot of times it's some kind of technical magazine or technical book. And heck, I'm showing my age by saying even a book. It's not even just a Kindle book. But we just, as leaders, we just got to keep pushing ourselves. And it's challenging because there's always going to be someone on your team that's, more technical in one item or something like this. And you got to embrace them. You got to understand, like, how do you mentor them and how do you harvest their knowledge to make the team better, even though if they're going to run circles about you, they're like, oh no, this is how you do this. We haven't done that in years. You got to embrace that you're not going to be able to know everything, but you also got to embrace that you're going to at least make the efforts to leverage part of your team. Hey, team, I'm going to push you to do this. I'm going to push you to do this, constantly saying, hey, let's obtain different certifications. Hey, I need you to make sure you're learning this technology. Hey, team, next Tuesday or next Wednesday, blah, 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 you're going to give a presentation on blank. For the teams that I'm always having with, I'm constantly pushing at them. Are you getting stronger? Are you getting more technical? Are you able to convey a technical to a business, into a business means? That's constantly something that's always going to be like, okay, who's presenting on what? Here it is. It's roulette. Okay, go. Next, in a couple days, you're presenting on this, and this. Here you go. Good luck. If you need help creating the PowerPoint deck or however you want to present it, I'll gladly help you. But this is part of the job. You've got to be able to do this. And that's how I always try and mentor my teams, pushing them in the technology realm.
Got it. Yeah. Let's take a look at the future, Alex. I know we don't have a perfect view of the future, and I know the crystal ball is murky, but let's just speculate. If we were to have this conversation in 5 years' time, musing about what happened in leadership recently, what do you think we'd be talking about? What do you think are the changes that are coming up in leadership, not technology, but in leadership?
Yeah, it's a good question. Again, AI is just now flapping us in the face. And how much of this is like, okay, how as leaders have we been able to harness that? How have we been able to adapt? How have we been able to weave that in there as leaders? How are we able to, how have we been able to help us to augment, not only just staff or technology, but initiatives? How have we done that? the technology is changing so rapidly, and it's going to continue to rapidly contain. Even since we started, it's hard to fathom. So in 5 years from now, yeah, we could be looking at a totally different realm of possibilities.
Hmm.
It's yeah, it's funny. You see some of these science fiction movies, and they're saying they're like, like a Terminator. They're like, oh, it's in 1984, and they're like, oh, in 2029, this is how the world looks, and we got robots and all. And it's like, is that reality? But like, well, shoot, it might be. That's a couple of years down the
Yeah.
road. Maybe it's 2039.
Yeah.
Is that possible? And we thought that was a joke. Like, okay, that's science fiction. But from 5 years from now, in terms of our leadership styles, I think everybody has to need to continue to evolve. People still got to be able to understand what is going around with us,
Hmm.
what are the indicators, and this is where also you've got to be able to understand what's going on, not just in some of your industry, but outside in the world, what's going
Hmm.
on. Um, for God's sakes, you never know when something is going to be coming up. How does drone technology work? How does this work out? Is it going to be the big thing next?
Yeah.
These different indicators that we have now about what's possible in the next couple of years. I think that's where 5 years from now we're going to be like, well, yeah, of course, everybody's using drones. That's how we get things delivered. Or hey, this
Yeah.
is how we're doing. Just using that as one example, but 5 years from now, there's going to be so many new things that it's almost going to be hard to predict. It's almost limiting. If you think about what Philip K. Dick, the great author about science fiction, all the things the things that he put into some of his novels. Wow, how did he come up with knowing the future, or at least estimating the future that relatively correctly? For us leaders, we've got to start looking at that, not just assuming that next year is going to be the exact same as was last
Yeah.
year, because that's just not the case.
It's not the case. Yeah. And it's easy to extrapolate and
Yeah,
just assume it's very similar. Yeah. I
yeah,
find the Foundation series also quite insightful in terms of societal, not just the technology, but the societal
yeah,
development that comes from that.
yeah.
Yeah. Alex, let me ask you a last question, and then we're going to land the plane. If
Sure.
you could change one thing about how most leaders lead, I know we're going to generalize now, but let's do it anyway. If there was one improvement that we could make to leadership, what would that be?
It's definitely got to be managing down.
Okay.
It's definitely got to be better development of your team. It doesn't matter if it's the person with 2 years experience coming out, or if it's your right hand person that's been in the same industry the same amount of time as you or longer, who knows. It's developing the team. There's just too much going on. You've got to be able to have the confidence in your team and what their capabilities are, and that takes time to really understand their knowledge level, their level of competence. And if you're not spending the time with them and really mentoring them down to really like, okay, wow, this person's ready for the next big
Mm,
step, or hey, I've got a major initiative. This person is, everybody else thinks he's not ready or she's not ready.
yeah.
I'm going to give it to them anyway and see what they can do. And I'll have
Hmm.
other people to guide them in case there is a little bit of slippage or failure or whatever you want to call it. Um, but really it's the mentoring of the team and getting the team ready, because as a leader, you can't do everything in yourself, no matter how technical you are, no matter how business savvy you are, no matter how lucky you are. It really doesn't matter,
Yeah.
because you're just a representative of the rest of the bigger organization. And if you don't have every single person in that organization down, the next layer down, the next layer down, however many layers, however big the organization is, unless you're developing that and creating a culture where, there are the expectations that everybody's getting stronger. I constantly tell teams that I'm in, I'm like, hey, realistically, are you going to retire with this present company? Yeah, probably not. Technology changes.
Hmm.
But for heaven's sakes, that if you leave the company, if you're working for me, I want to make sure that you look back and say, wow, you know what? When I was working on Alex's team or working in that organization, I learned a lot. I got pushed. I learned it, and I'm a better professional because I was on that team. I got pushed and I learned it, and I even got out of my comfort level. And that's something as a leader that I always make sure that I'm reflecting back. Did I push the team? Working, managing up. Yeah, go read a book about that. There's a gazillion of them out there. How do you manage up? But, whatever. But really managing down your team, because that's your team. That's your responsibility. If they do well, you do well. If they fail, you fail. It's you got to develop them. You got to set them with realistic goals, not just the regular, hey, HR says I got to make these four,
Right.
4 requirements for their annual bonus. Yeah, big whoop. That doesn't always necessarily, it should be like, okay, I'm going to push them even harder than what it might be on the paper. You've got to be able to really understand, their path. You got to ask everybody on your team, okay, do you have an individual 1, 3, and 5-year goal? You should be able to look at anybody on your team and say, hey, you, so-and-so, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And if that's not happening, that's something that I reflect on myself, is that I'm not doing my job. I normally did not have that through my career. And that is something that, wow, I could be, I'm thinking about how much further along I could be if someone was there pushing me, if I was a mentor and saying, hey, look, if you don't know where you're going, if you're not, that's always the thing where they talk about a runner. If you don't know where you're running to, how do you know when you're done?
Yeah.
You could just go run and like, oh, well, great, I end up here. But if you don't have a destination, or if you don't have a goal where you're going to, how do you know how well you have to train? How well do you know that you got to be able to start educating yourself? To say, hey, look, I want to be the best technical architect ever. Okay, great. You got to go the technical route. Or, hey, look, I want to be, a CISO, a CTO, or CIO. You got to go this route. You got to, maybe have to take more education. But you got to know where the end goal is. If you don't know where you're going, you're just, another day, another year, and same. But as a leader, you got to push. Where's your 1-year goal? What's your 3-year goal? What's your 5-year goal? And again, goes from there. It could be even longer. But if you don't start pushing people early, and they don't start realizing that's how they're supposed to manage their own career, they're going to be spinning the wheels. Everybody needs to manage their own careers, and me as a leader is to instill that knowledge of them. You got to manage your own career.
Nice. I love this. This is a great, it's almost a leadership mantra, right? To keep challenging people and to help them get along thereby. Alex, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure having you in the conversation here.
Always love to give back to industry, and thank you so much for your time and your opportunity. But I love giving back, and I think this is what a leader does, is you give back to industry. So thank you for the time and the effort.
To everyone out there, remember to like, share, and subscribe, and join us again for our next episode. And until then, keep your brain cells active.